They are perhaps the most well-known, unique species in fantasy. They are creatures of the occult, widely accepted to be beings far greater than that of humankind. In Uruk, they come in all forms, having over 8 distinct races. This is the lore of the elves. In Uruk were 8 races of elves that were very distinct in attitude and appearance. High Elves, Wood Elves, New Elves, Dark Elves, Dusk Elves, Winter Elves, Wild Elves, and Moon Elves. Elves never had brown skin, as dark as a Kukwan human. Even Dark Elves have a more gray shade as opposed to a Kukwan's brownish color. It was belief of the greatest of the High Elves and the New Elves, perhaps the most influential races of the elven peoples, that red hair and a browner complexion were a curse of Val. The greatest and most noble of the elves were the High Elves. They had long and pointed ears ranging from 6 to 8 inches in length. Their eyes never glowed and were the colors of a human's, with the addition of purple and red. Red and brown eyes were, by the way, considered to be very lowly among the High Elves. High Elves always had pale, fair skin, and they had a celestial glow of gold radiating from their bodies. They stood 6'1" on average and lived about 200 years. High Elves can have black, brown, red, or blonde hair, but if a child is born with red hair, that child is ridiculed for it, for the High Elves did not wish to believe that they received the curse of Val to the extent of humans. The High Elves were known to be the most beautiful and desirable race within the elven species. In every town and city where a High Elf would live, he or she would be found in the most adorned and upper-class home. It was their belief that their race and their species was the best of Uruk, and they displayed themselves as such, having homes and gowns made of diamond and gold. New Elves were elves nearly as noble and proper-mannered as High Elves. What was most notable about their character was that most of them, though not all, were easily angered and acted upon wrath quickly. Because of this, High Elves believed it important to keep the New Elves under submission and oppression, so that their destructive behaviors might be kept at bay. New Elves had the longest of ears that ranged from 12 to 15 inches, and extremely long eyebrows that were about 8 inches in length, and trailed off their foreheads. They always had eyes that glowed green, hair that was blonde, and skin pale or tanned. They stood an average of 6'4", and lived about 250 years. They were called New Elves because they were the newest race of elves to arise during the age of Teldria. As the youngest of the elven species, they acted like children, ready to throw temper tantrums. The Wood Elves were much different from the High Elves and the New Elves. They lived in settlements that were high above, constructed in the trees. They frequently interacted with humans in Dodrin, even going as far as to try to make friends with the Dwarven people, though the dwarves wished nothing to do with any kind of elf. Wood Elves had very short and pointed ears that were around 3 inches in length. Their eyes were always brown or hazel, their hair was black, brown, red, or blonde, and their skin was pale, light tan, or a darker tan. They stood an average of 5'10", and lived 170 years. One notable aspect of the Wood Elves is that they loved to sing. When idle or doing a mundane task, they tended to naturally sing and form rhythms with their hands and their feet. Dark Elves were the most humble of the elves. Though they were many times secluded from the other species of Uruk, they were friendly to outsiders and kept away from warlike behavior. They did not interact much with the other elves of Uruk, other than the Dusk Elves, who were very similar to them in character and appearance. Dark Elves had ears as long and as wide as High Elves, and their eyes were of the same color. They always had skin ranging from light gray to dark gray, and hair that was black, white, or blonde. Dark Elves stood at 6 feet and 2 inches, and they lived about 200 years. Dusk Elves were the quiet race of elves, not speaking or acting unless necessary. They commonly practiced the arts of assassination, stealth, and killing, and did such in the name of honor and justice. They were good friends with the Dark Elves, who, like them, were humble and reverent. Dusk Elves had very long and pointed ears, ranging from 10 to 12 inches, almost as long as the New Elves. They had eyes that glowed white, blue, purple, or red, and their hair was either purely gray, gray with a hint of blue, or gray with a hint of purple. Their skin ranged from dark blue to dark purple in color. Dusk Elves averaged 6 feet and 3 inches in height, and they lived about 190 years. Winter Elves were known as the most open and friendly of the elves, even more so than Wood Elves. Across their face was always written a genuine smile, and they went out of their way to help anyone they could. They, like Wood Elves, didn't believe in social status. In fact, they believed themselves to be equal to every species on Uruk, including boggarts. Winter Elves had ears 4 inches long, only 1 inch longer than that of a Wood Elf. Their eyes did not glow like a New Elves. In fact, all Winter Elf males were born blind. As a result, all the males had completely white eyes, as opposed to their female counterparts, who had irises always light blue. Every Winter Elf had very light baby blue skin that was almost white. Their hair was blue as the sky, and complemented their beautiful skin. Winter Elves averaged a height of 5 feet and 10 inches, and lived about 250 years. The most common spellborn among the Winter race were Witches of Winter, spellborn that commanded over snow and ice. Wild Elves had ears about as short as a Wood Elves, but oddly wide. Wild Elves were, perhaps, the inverse of Winter Elves. The females always had full black eyes that enhanced their vision to incredible extents. The males always had regular eyes with a blue iris, similarly to the Winter Elves' females. They loved living in hot, sunny, and tropical areas, and were the most primitive of all the elves. They organized into tribes and worshipped false gods, and primarily spoke the language of Dolokut. The Wild Elves were ruthless and unintelligent, attacking and consuming any living being that sparked their curiosity. Wild Elves always had tan skin, ranging from a darker tan to a lighter tan. They averaged 5'7" in height and lived for about 130 years. One might immediately recognize a Wild Elf by their painted, dirty bodies and hair twisted into dreadlocks. If you ever happen to come across a Wild Elf, run. Moon Elves were the last and most enigmatic and mysterious of the elves. They were commonly found in green forests, elevated above trees on floating structures where they studied books and the arts of magic. They were, like Wood Elves and Winter Elves, very friendly to other species and welcomed them into their homes. That being said, it was still very hard to actually enter the home of a Moon Elf, for their race was probably the rarest among the elven species. Most peoples of Uruk lived their entire life without seeing a Moon Elf. Some of them never even heard of Moon Elves before. Moon Elves had ears as long as High Elves, eyes that glowed white, and purely white skin and white hair that glowed brightly like the moon. They nearly appeared as angels without wings. Moon Elves averaged 5 feet and 11 inches, and lived an average of 400 years. They were in tune with nature and the elements, hence their preference to live in forest regions rather than in large towns and cities. The Moon Elves were the wisest of the elven species, and imparted their knowledge to the most ambitious travelers that crossed their paths. This was the lore of the elves. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please hit the subscribe button for more lore videos to come. Thank you for watching, as always, and Until next time.